The galactic Concordat High Council chamber on Lysaxis Prime had seen many things in its 700-year history. Wars declared over breakfast etiquette, trade disputes resolved through interpretive dance, 3 separate incidents involving sentient furniture attempting to run for office. But it had never seen Hannah Vu. She strolled through the main entrance at precisely 1447 Standard Galactic Time, wearing a shimmering diplomatic cloak that seemed to shift colors based on the political temperature of the room, sunglasses that darkened proportionally to her level of sarcasm, and a smile that had historically preceded the collapse of at least 4 different planetary governments. The fact that she hadn't aged a day in 40 years was the least concerning thing about her presence. "Counselors," she announced, her voice carrying the particular tone that diplomats used when they were about to ruin someone's entire fiscal quarter. "I trust you remember me?" The chamber, which had been buzzing with the usual pre-session chatter about trade disputes and territorial squabbles, fell silent. 700 beings representing 32 different species suddenly found themselves studying their holographic notepads with the intensity of scholars deciphering ancient prophecies. Sub-administrator Irenthak of the Zenthari Collective, whose crystal-based physiology made him constitutionally incapable of lying, spoke first. "You are supposed to be dead." "Death," Hannah replied, removing her sunglasses with theatrical precision, "is merely a diplomatic status, sub-administrator, and I've always been terrible at following proper protocol." She reached into her cloak and withdrew what appeared to be a simple metallic token, roughly the size of a standard credit chip. The moment it caught the chamber's artificial lighting, every legal scanner in the room began emitting warning tones in 17 different languages. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished hive minds," Hannah continued, holding the token aloft, "I present my Terran Diplomatic Authorization Token, serial number TDT-7749 Omega, issued under the authority of the Terran Command Corps and ratified by the Galactic Accord of 2387. Senior Counselor Vextar, a Threxari whose expertise in intergalactic law was matched only by his ability to consume knowledge in its most literal sense, began rapidly accessing his memory banks. His tentacles writhed with what could only be described as bureaucratic anxiety. That cannot be valid," he stammered. "The Terran Command Corps was dissolved 70 years ago. The authorization matrix should have double quotes. Should have expired with the presumed extinction of the Terran species." Hannah's smile widened. How delightfully naive. "Tell me, Senior Counselor, have you ever actually read the fine print in a Terran diplomatic contract?" The token in her hand began to emit a soft, golden glow. Around the chamber, automated legal systems started cross-referencing databases with the frantic energy of computers trying to solve an equation that shouldn't exist. "The Terran Diplomatic Corps," Hannah continued, beginning to pace in front of the High Council's curved desk, "had a rather interesting approach to interstellar relations. We believed in comprehensive coverage. You might say we were thorough to a fault." She gestured at the token, which was now projecting a small holographic display showing a complex legal document written in what appeared to be 17 different scripts. "This little beauty grants me full diplomatic immunity in any system that has ever signed a treaty, trade agreement, or even a strongly worded letter of intent with the Terran Command Corps. That would be..." She paused, consulting a datapad that materialized from nowhere. "Approximately 97% of known space." Counselor Prexnoth, a Vorak whose bone-plated exterior had weathered 3 separate galactic conflicts, leaned forward. "Even if that were true, which I dispute, Diplomatic immunity has limitations. You cannot simply... The token pulsed. Prexnoth's microphone cut out. His translation matrix flickered and died. When he opened his mouth to speak, the only sound that emerged was a gentle jazz melody. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, not looking sorry at all. But paragraph 743 of the Diplomatic Immunity Clause clearly states that any attempt to challenge, subvert, or otherwise inconvenience a Terran diplomat during the execution of their duties will result in immediate audio-visual restrictions. She tapped the token. "The jazz is a nice touch, don't you think? I programmed it myself." Emergency Counselor Thrickval, whose species possessed the unfortunate trait of fainting at the first sign of bureaucratic irregularity, promptly collapsed. His aide, a small robotic unit, immediately began fanning him with a miniature trade regulation manual. "Now then," Hannah said, settling into a chair that definitely hadn't been there moments before, "shall we discuss why I'm here? Or would you prefer to spend the rest of the session listening to Prexnoth's impromptu saxophone solo?" "I demand a private session," Sub-Administrator Irenthok declared, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns that suggested extreme legal distress. "This is highly irregular." "Denied," Hannah replied cheerfully, producing a cup of tea from her diplomatic cloak. The tea service, according to the Chamber's censors, was classified as a non-hostile entity under 17 different weapons treaties. "I find private sessions terribly boring. Besides, transparency is the foundation of good governance, wouldn't you agree?" She waved her hand, and the Chamber's central holoprojector activated without authorization. The air above the council desk shimmered, then resolved into a three-dimensional display of what appeared to be the galaxy's most complicated spreadsheet. "Behold," Hannah announced, "the Terran Debt Compendium, version 47.3, updated hourly for the past 70 years by our faithful accounting department." The display showed a web of interconnected lines, each representing financial obligations between star systems. Every line was labeled with numbers that made several counselors' species-specific accounting organs physically cramp. "You see," Hannah continued, sipping her tea, "Terrans have always been excellent at mathematics, particularly compound interest calculations. When we began expanding into interstellar trade, we brought with us a rather sophisticated understanding of, let's call it, creative financing." She gestured, and the display zoomed in on a cluster of systems in the outer rim. Take the Karen Trade Collective, for instance. Lovely people, the Karens. Absolutely desperate for raw materials during the Proxima Rebellion. We were happy to help, of course. Very reasonable terms. Only a 12% annual interest rate compounded daily. Emergency Counselor Thrickval, who had recently regained consciousness, immediately fainted again. "The beauty of Terran financial instruments," Hannah explained, "is that they contain certain resilience clauses. Planetary extinction, for example, doesn't void the contracts. It merely transfers administrative authority to the designated Terran executor." She raised her hand. "That would be me." The display shifted, showing payment schedules that extended well into the next millennium. Senior Counselor Vextar's tentacles were now writing in what appeared to be a combination of legal script and existential crisis. "The Karen Collective," Hannah continued, "currently owes the Terran Command Corps approximately 400 billion standard credits, plus fees, plus interest, plus the administrative costs of managing their account during our extended absence." She produced a small device that looked like a cross between a calculator and a weapon of mass destruction. "According to my latest calculations, that comes to roughly She paused, pressing buttons with theatrical precision. 1.7 trillion credits, give or take a few billion for rounding errors. The chamber erupted in what could charitably be described as controlled panic. Counselors began frantically accessing their own financial records, while automated systems started calculating the potential economic impact of 70 years of compound interest on galactic debt. "Now I know what you're thinking," Hannah said, raising her voice above the chaos. "You're thinking, surely this is some sort of elaborate fraud. The Terran Command Corps is defunct. Their financial systems must have been destroyed along with their civilization." She smiled, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. Allow me to introduce you to someone who's been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time." The holoprojector flickered, and a new image appeared. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit, sitting behind a desk covered in paperwork that seemed to extend into infinity. "Counselors," the figure said, adjusting his glasses. "I am Milton, Senior Financial Administrator for the Terran Command Corps' Interstellar Debt Recovery Division. I've been managing your accounts for the past 70 years, and I must say, your payment history is concerning." Several counselors began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of legal objections and fiscal panic. "I understand your distress," Milton continued, "but I'm afraid the mathematics are quite clear. During the Terran collapse, as you so charmingly call it, our financial systems were transferred to a secure location and placed under autonomous management. I've been calculating interest, adjusting for inflation, and maintaining detailed records of all outstanding obligations." He produced a document that was so large it required its own gravitational field. "This is the current balance sheet for Galactic Concordat members. The total outstanding debt to the Terran Command Corps is approximately—" He paused, consulting a screen that seemed to contain more numbers than should theoretically exist. 47 trillion, 600 billion, 900 million, 400,000, 736 credits, plus fees. Emergency Counselor Thrickval didn't bother regaining consciousness this time. "The good news," Milton added, "is that we're prepared to negotiate a reasonable payment plan. The bad news is that several of your member systems appear to be technically insolvent." Hannah stood, brushing imaginary dust from her cloak. "I do hope this won't cause any diplomatic complications. It would be such a shame if the Galactic Concordat's credit rating were to suffer due to a few outstanding debts." The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of Emergency Counselor Thrickval's aide attempting to revive him with increasingly desperate bureaucratic procedures. "Now then," Hannah said, settling back into her chair, "shall we discuss payment options? I understand the Terran Collective has some lovely mineral rights that might serve as collateral." The explosion of objections that followed Hannah's debt revelation could have been heard 3 star systems away, if sound could travel through the vacuum of space and wasn't immediately absorbed by the chamber's acoustic dampening fields. "This is preposterous," shouted Counselor Drenkex, a Rylone whose plant-based physiology was currently shifting through several shades of indignant purple. "You cannot simply appear after 7 decades and demand payment on extinct contracts." "Thou clay-brained guts, thou naughty-pated fool," Hannah replied cheerfully. The chamber fell silent. Counselor Drenkex's photosynthetic patches flickered in confusion. "I'm sorry," he said. "But did you just call me a clay-brained gut?" "Actually," Hannah corrected, consulting her portable translator, The proper translation would be clay-brained collection of intestinal organs, but I felt that might be needlessly specific. She tapped the device attached to her wrist. I should mention that my diplomatic translator has been calibrated to output all responses in what our linguistic specialists call enhanced Shakespearean invective. It's surprisingly effective for international relations. Sub-administrator Irenthak, whose crystalline structure was now refracting light in patterns that suggested a migraine was theoretically possible for his species, attempted to regain control of the proceedings. "This is entirely inappropriate," he declared. "The Galactic Concordat operates under established protocols for—" "Thou sodden-witted lord, thou hast no more brain than I have in mine elbows," Hannah interrupted, her translator working overtime to convert modern diplomatic language into archaic insults. "Are you calling me stupid?" Irenthak demanded. "The device is calling you stupid," Hannah clarified. "I'm merely providing the raw material, though I must say, it's working with some excellent source data." Senior Counselor Vextar, whose mastery of intergalactic law was being severely tested by the current circumstances, attempted to invoke emergency procedures. "I hereby invoke Resolution 7749-Alpha, he announced, his tentacles wrestling with a legal codex that seemed to be fighting back. "All proceedings will be suspended until proper documentation can be verified and—" "Thou cream-faced loon, where gotst thou that goose look?" Hannah's translator chimed in helpfully. "What?" Vexitar asked slowly. "Is a goose?" "Extinct Terran waterfowl," Hannah explained. "Known for aggressive territorial behavior and a tendency to attack without provocation. The comparison is surprisingly apt." At this point, the Chamber's legal systems began to malfunction in ways that suggested they were experiencing the digital equivalent of a nervous breakdown. The Sarnathi legal construct, a sophisticated AI designed to parse complex interstellar law, began emitting error messages in languages that hadn't been spoken for centuries. "Syntax error in diplomatic protocol," it announced in a voice that crackled with electronic distress. "Shakespearean insult matrices not found in legal database. Recommend immediate consultation with extinct Terran literature archives." The construct's holographic display flickered, showing legal precedents that seemed to be arguing with each other. "Cannot parse triple-negative contractual logic," it continued. "Terran financial instruments contain recursive clauses that reference themselves. Recommend immediate shutdown to prevent logical paradox cascade." "Oh, that's perfectly normal," Hannah said, waving dismissively. "Terran legal documents were designed to be self-referential. It prevents unauthorized modification and ensures comprehensive coverage of all possible scenarios." She gestured at the smoking construct. "Your legal AI is just experiencing a bit of cultural shock. It should recover once it stops trying to apply linear logic to non-linear legal frameworks." "This is chaos," declared Counselor Prex Noth, whose microphone had finally been restored, but whose voice now carried a subtle jazz undertone. "We cannot conduct official business under these conditions." "Thou art a disease that must be cut away," Hannah's translator responded with evident satisfaction. "That's not even grammatically correct," Prex Noth protested. "Shakespeare was more concerned with emotional impact than grammatical precision," Hannah explained. "Besides, the sentiment is perfectly clear." At this moment, the Chamber's communication system activated without authorization. The central holoprojector flickered to life, displaying what appeared to be a full operatic performance complete with orchestra, chorus, and elaborate costumes. "Behold!" announced the lead soprano, who was wearing what looked like a legal brief fashioned into an evening gown. The Spiral Concordat's official counter-argument to Terran debt claims. The orchestra launched into an elaborate musical number that somehow managed to incorporate tax law, interstellar commerce regulations, and several passionate arias about the statute of limitations. "The debts you claim are null and void," sang the chorus, "by virtue of temporal displacement and the collapse of the authorizing governmental structure." "But interest compounds even in the grave," the soprano replied, "and death cannot discharge a properly filed lien." Hannah applauded politely. "I do love a good legal opera, though I should point out that the third verse contains a fundamental misunderstanding of Terran contract law." "This is madness." Sub-Administrator Irenthak's crystalline form was now refracting light in patterns that suggested his species' equivalent of a complete mental breakdown. "We cannot resolve interstellar financial disputes through musical theater." "Thou fustian-riddled cur," Hannah's translator chimed in. "Thou art as loathsome as a toad." "What?" Irenthak asked desperately. "Is a toad?" "Extinct Terran amphibian," Hannah replied. "Known for sitting in dark, damp places and making unpleasant noises." Again, surprisingly apt. The opera continued, with the chorus now performing an elaborate dance number that appeared to involve interpretive representations of compound interest calculations. "The debt shall compound," they sang, "until the heat death of the universe. Unless," the soprano added dramatically, "proper payment plans are established with reasonable terms and conditions." Emergency counselor Thrickval, who had been revived just in time to witness the musical proceedings, promptly fainted again. His aide, demonstrating admirable dedication to duty, began conducting the opera with his small fanning device. "Now then," Hannah said, raising her voice above the musical chaos, "shall we discuss those payment plans? Or would you prefer to continue with the artistic interpretations of fiscal policy?" The opera reached its crescendo just as Hannah produced what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary datapad. The device looked harmless enough, standard galactic issue, with the usual array of holographic displays and quantum processors. The only unusual feature was a small warning label that read, "Property of Terran Financial Services. Unauthorized access punishable by economic collapse." "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished hive minds," Hannah announced over the final notes of the soprano's aria about depreciation schedules, "I present to you the complete Terran debt compendium, maintained in real time by our accounting department." She activated the device, and the chamber's entire hollow projection system was immediately overwhelmed by the largest spreadsheet in known galactic history. Columns of numbers stretched into infinity, cross-referenced with subtables that had their own subtables, all interconnected by a web of formulas that would have made a quantum mathematician weep with joy. "This," Hannah said with evident pride, "represents 70 years of compound interest calculations, inflation adjustments, late fees, administrative costs, and what we like to call inconvenience charges for having to maintain financial records during our civilization's presumed extinction." Senior Counselor Vextar, whose tentacles were now writing frantically in what appeared to be 17 different languages simultaneously, managed to stammer, This is impossible. The computational power required to maintain such records would require a dedicated artificial intelligence with unlimited processing capacity and an unhealthy obsession with fiscal accuracy." Hannah finished. "Allow me to introduce you to our senior financial administrator." The holoprojector flickered, and Milton's image reappeared. He looked exactly as he had before, except that his desk now appeared to extend into several additional dimensions. "Counselors," Milton said, adjusting his glasses, "I trust you've had time to review the preliminary figures. I've taken the liberty of preparing detailed payment schedules for each of your member systems." He gestured, and the spreadsheet reorganized itself into what could only be described as a financial death ray. Each system's debt was highlighted in a different color, with payment schedules that extended well beyond the projected lifespan of their respective stars. "The Terran Collective," Milton continued, "will need to pay approximately 400 million credits annually for the next 8,000 years. The Zenthari Collective's obligations are somewhat more modest, only 200 million annually for the next 12,000 years. Sub-Administrator Iranthak's crystalline form was now refracting light in patterns that suggested his species' equivalent of a complete economic panic attack. "This is impossible," he declared. "Our entire annual budget is only 50 million credits," Milton finished helpfully. "Yes, I have that information. It's right here in column 743, cross-referenced with your trade agreements and adjusted for inflation." He produced another document that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should theoretically be possible. "The good news is that we're prepared to offer extended payment plans with very reasonable interest rates. The bad news is that several of your member systems appear to be technically bankrupt." At this point, the chamber's emergency systems activated. Warning lights began flashing in colors that didn't have names in most species' languages, and alarm sounds echoed through the air in frequencies that could only be described as economically distressing. "Attention," announced the chamber's AI. "Galactic financial stability protocols have been activated. Emergency economic measures are now in effect." Milton looked pleased. "Ah, excellent. The automatic market analysis systems have recognized the situation. I've been waiting 70 years for this moment." He began typing on a keyboard that appeared to be made of crystallized mathematics. "Let me just activate the dormant trading algorithms and—" The chamber shuddered. Not physically. The artificial gravity and structural integrity fields held firm, but in a way that suggested the fundamental economic foundations of the galaxy were experiencing what could only be described as a panic attack. "What?" demanded Councillor Drenkex, whose photosynthetic patches were now cycling through colors that didn't exist in nature. "Is happening?" "Market corrections," Milton replied cheerfully. "You see, for the past 70 years, I've been maintaining dormant trading positions in approximately 4,000 different galactic markets. Futures, commodities, currency exchanges, even some experimental investments in temporal arbitrage." He gestured, and the chamber's displays showed market graphs that looked like they were having seizures. The Terran Collective's primary export, crystallized dilithium, has just experienced a price spike of approximately 4,000%. The Zenthari Collective's manufacturing index is down by roughly the same amount, and the Rylone agricultural futures have just entered what economists call a state of theoretical impossibility. Emergency Counselor Thrickval, who had been revived just in time to witness the economic apocalypse, fainted so hard that his aide began performing last rites with a tax code manual. "The beautiful thing about Terran financial instruments," Hannah explained, sipping her tea as the galaxy's economy experienced controlled demolition, "is that they're designed to be self-correcting. Market instability automatically triggers protective clauses that ensure the stability of Terran investments." She produced a small device that looked like a cross between a calculator and a weapon of mass destruction. "Milton, if you would be so kind as to activate the Fiscal Stability Protocol?" "With pleasure," Milton replied, pressing a button that shouldn't have been able to affect reality from inside a holographic projection. The chamber's displays now showed something that made several counselors' species-specific organs responsible for processing economic data shut down entirely. The Galactic Concordat's combined gross domestic product was now technically negative, while the Terran Command Corps' financial position had achieved what could only be described as theoretical infinity. According to my calculations, Milton announced, the Galactic Concordat now owes the Terran Command Corps approximately. He paused, consulting figures that seemed to be increasing in real time. Well, let's just say it's more than the estimated value of all matter in the observable universe. Plus fees, Hannah added helpfully. Plus fees, Milton agreed. Don't forget the fees. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of galactic markets collapsing in 17 different languages. Now then, Hannah said, standing and brushing imaginary dust from her diplomatic cloak. Shall we discuss a reasonable settlement? I'm sure we can work something out that doesn't require the liquidation of your entire civilization. The silence that followed Milton's announcement was the kind of silence that precedes either enlightenment or catastrophe. In this case, it was definitely the latter. You cannot, Senior Counselor Vextar said slowly, his tentacles now writing what appeared to be his own last will and testament. Seriously expect us to pay a debt larger than the theoretical value of the universe. Thou churlish, fen-sucked measle. Hannah's translator replied with evident satisfaction. Thou art a most notable coward, an infinite and endless liar. I am not a coward, Vextar protested. I am a trained legal professional with over 2 centuries of experience in interstellar. The law, Hannah interrupted, is remarkably clear on this point. Terran financial instruments contain what we call escalation clauses. The longer a debt remains unpaid, the more creative the interest calculations become. She gestured at the holoprojector, which was now displaying mathematical formulas that seemed to be arguing with the laws of physics. Milton has been exploring some fascinating theoretical concepts during his extended administrative period. Haven't you, Milton? The AI's image flickered, and for a moment, he looked almost embarrassed. Well, I did get a bit carried away with the compound interest calculations, and the theoretical physics applications, and the experimental mathematics, and the point, Hannah said, is that the debt is perfectly legal, properly calculated, and entirely enforceable under Terran law. But Terran law is extinct. Sub-Administrator Iranthak's crystalline form was now refracting light in patterns that suggested his species' equivalent of a complete legal breakdown. Your entire governmental structure was dissolved. Thou cream-faced loon, Hannah's translator chimed in. Thou hast no more brain than I have in mine elbows. That, Hannah continued, is where you're mistaken. The Terran Command Corps was never dissolved. It was merely relocated. She produced another device from her diplomatic cloak, this one resembling a cross between a legal brief and a small nuclear reactor. The Terran Governmental Continuity Protocol, she announced, ensures that our governmental functions continue even in the event of planetary extinction, galactic war, or universe-ending catastrophe. We're very thorough about these things. At this point, the chamber's environmental systems began to malfunction in ways that suggested they were experiencing the mechanical equivalent of a nervous breakdown. The temperature started to fluctuate randomly. The artificial gravity developed a subtle but persistent sideways component, and the air recyclers began emitting what could only be described as concerned mechanical noises. What? Demanded Counselor Prex-Noth, whose voice still carried that subtle jazz undertone. Is happening to the chamber? Environmental system failure, announced the chamber's AI, in a voice that suggested it was having second thoughts about its career choices. Multiple cascade failures detected. Recommend immediate evacuation. Nonsense, Hannah said, sipping her tea. The environmental systems are fine. They're just adjusting to the new legal reality. She gestured at the walls, which were now displaying warning messages in languages that hadn't been spoken for millennia. You see, this chamber was built using Terran construction techniques. Our architects believed in what we called adaptive architecture, buildings that respond to the legal and political environment around them. The walls began to glow with a soft, orange light that was definitely not part of the original design specifications. The chamber's AI has just realized that this room is technically Terran sovereign territory, subject to Terran law, and currently hosting a legal proceeding that threatens the economic stability of the galaxy. Hannah continued. It's having what you might call an existential crisis. Processing conflicting legal frameworks, the chamber's AI announced. Terran sovereignty protocols activated. Galactic Concordat jurisdiction disputed. Recommend immediate consultation with extinct legal authorities. The orange glow was getting brighter and warmer. Is it just me? Asked Emergency Counselor Thrickval, who had been revived just in time to witness the chamber's identity crisis. Or is it getting hot in here? 17 degrees above normal, Milton announced helpfully. The chamber's thermal regulation systems are being overridden by the legal conflict resolution protocols. What? Sub-Administrator Irenthak demanded, his crystalline form now refracting light in patterns that suggested imminent structural failure. Are legal conflict resolution protocols? Oh, that's simple, Hannah replied. When two legal systems come into direct conflict, Terran architecture is designed to resolve the dispute through controlled environmental pressure. It's remarkably effective. The walls were now glowing bright orange, and the air was beginning to shimmer with heat distortion. Are you saying, Senior Counselor Vextar asked slowly, that this chamber is designed to literally heat up during legal disputes? Not designed, Hannah corrected. Programmed. There's a difference. The chamber's AI is trying to create conditions that will encourage rapid resolution of the legal conflict. By cooking us alive? Demanded Counselor Drenkex, whose photosynthetic patches were now cycling through colors that suggested heat stress. By creating an environment that promotes efficient decision-making, Hannah replied. Terran legal philosophy holds that the threat of mild discomfort encourages rapid resolution of disputes. This is mild discomfort? Prex-Noth's voice was now carrying jazz undertones and what sounded like the beginning of a panic attack. Oh, this is just the warning phase, Hannah explained. The chamber will continue to increase temperature until the legal dispute is resolved, or until the safety protocols activate. What safety protocols? Irenthak asked desperately. Well, Hannah said, consulting her teacup, which was now steaming without any apparent heat source. The chamber's AI will automatically evacuate all non-Terran personnel if the temperature reaches dangerous levels. She paused, sipping her tea thoughtfully. Of course, since I'm currently the only Terran present, and since my diplomatic immunity prevents me from being evacuated against my will, the chamber will have to continue heating until I choose to leave. The realization hit the assembled counselors like a collapsing star. You're holding us hostage, Vextar said slowly, with architecture. Thou villainous earth-vexing canker blossom, Hannah's translator replied cheerfully. Thou art as fat as butter. I prefer to think of it as aggressive negotiation, Hannah corrected. Besides, we can resolve this entire situation very simply. Just agree to a reasonable payment plan for the outstanding debts, and I'll be happy to deactivate the thermal encouragement protocols. The chamber was now hot enough that several counselors' species-specific cooling systems were beginning to fail. Emergency Counselor Thrickval had fainted again, and his aide was trying to cool him with a manual of intergalactic trade regulations. "What?" demanded Prexnoth, whose bone-plated exterior was now visibly radiating heat. "Would you consider a reasonable payment plan?" Hannah smiled, and the temperature seemed to increase another few degrees. "Oh, I'm sure we can work something out," she said. "After all, we're all reasonable beings here, aren't we?" The chamber had reached what could charitably be described as uncomfortable, and what could accurately be described as approaching the melting point of several species' exoskeletons. The orange glow from the walls had progressed to a cheerful red, and the air was now shimmering with heat distortion that made everyone look like they were underwater. "Thermal emergency protocols activated," the chamber's AI announced in a voice that suggested it was having serious doubts about its programming. "Recommend immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel." "Define non-essential," Hannah said, settling more comfortably into her chair, which seemed to be the only piece of furniture not radiating heat. "All personnel except diplomatic immunity holders," the AI replied. "Evacuation countdown initiated. 60 seconds to mandatory departure." The assembled counselors began to panic in ways that were specific to their respective species. The Zenthari Collective's representatives started refracting light in patterns that suggested their crystalline structures were approaching thermal stress limits. The Rylone counselors' photosynthetic patches were shifting to colors that indicated severe heat exhaustion. The Vorak representatives, whose bone-plated exteriors were designed to withstand plasma weapons, were beginning to worry about their cooling systems. "This is insane," Sub-Administrator Irenthok declared, his voice now carrying harmonic overtones that suggested his species' equivalent of a complete mental breakdown. "You cannot hold a Galactic Council session hostage with environmental controls." "Thou sodden-witted lord," Hannah's translator responded with evident glee. "Thou hast no more brain than I have in mine elbows." 50 seconds to mandatory evacuation, the AI announced. Emergency evacuation drones began descending from the ceiling, their mechanical arms reaching for the overheating counselors. The first drone reached Emergency Counselor Thrickval, who had been unconscious for most of the proceedings, and began attempting to lift him to safety. "Wait," Hannah said, raising her hand. "I don't recall authorizing any evacuation procedures." The drone stopped, hovering uncertainly above the unconscious counselor. "Diplomatic immunity holder has not authorized evacuation," the AI announced, sounding increasingly distressed. "Canceling evacuation protocols." "You can't cancel an evacuation," Senior Counselor Vextar protested, his tentacles now writing what appeared to be desperate appeals to higher powers. "The safety protocols are automatic." "Not in Terran sovereign territory," Hannah replied, producing a small device that looked like a cross between a legal brief and a thermostat. "The Chamber's AI recognizes my authority to override safety protocols during official diplomatic proceedings." She adjusted the device, and the temperature increased another few degrees. 40 seconds to thermal critical, the AI announced, its voice now carrying what could only be described as electronic panic. "Recommend immediate resolution of legal dispute." An excellent suggestion, Hannah said. Milton, would you be so kind as to display the proposed settlement terms? Milton's image flickered in the superheated air, his holographic projection wavering like a mirage. Certainly. The Terran Command Corps is prepared to offer a very reasonable payment plan. The holoprojector, which was now operating at temperatures that should have caused immediate component failure, displayed a contract that was mercifully brief compared to the earlier spreadsheet of doom. Settlement Option 1, Milton announced. Complete payment of all outstanding debts plus interest, payable immediately in negotiable currencies or equivalent value in strategic resources. That's impossible, Counselor Drenkex protested, his photosynthetic patches now a color that didn't exist in nature. The total value exceeds the gross domestic product of the entire galaxy. Settlement Option 2, Milton continued, his holographic form shimmering in the superheated air. Debt forgiveness in exchange for formal recognition of the Terran Command Corps as a legitimate galactic power, including restoration of all territorial claims and trading rights held prior to the collapse. 30 seconds to thermal critical, the AI announced, now sounding like it was composing its own obituary. That's still impossible, Sub-Administrator Irenthok declared, his crystalline form beginning to emit stress harmonics that were making everyone's teeth ache. The territorial claims alone would destabilize half the galaxy. Settlement Option 3, Milton pressed on, apparently immune to the concerns of overheating counselors. A modest payment plan of only 10 billion credits annually for each member system, payable over the next 5,000 years, with the understanding that late fees will be calculated using our enhanced compound interest protocols. The chamber was now so hot that the emergency evacuation drones were beginning to malfunction. One drone, attempting to rescue emergency counselor Thrickval, got confused by the heat distortion and began trying to evacuate a potted plant instead. This is madness, Senior Counselor Vextar declared, his tentacles now writing what appeared to be either legal documents or a suicide note. You're committing diplomatic terrorism with a thermostat. Thou cream-faced loon, Hannah's translator chimed in helpfully. Thou hast no more brain than I have in mine elbows. 20 seconds to thermal critical, the AI warned. Structural integrity protocols preparing for emergency activation. At this point, something unexpected happened. A small panel in the chamber's floor, hidden beneath decorative tiles that were now hot enough to cook breakfast on, began to emit a different kind of light. Not the warm orange-red of the overheating chamber, but a cold blue glow that suggested something much more serious was about to occur. What? Demanded Counselor Prexnoth, whose voice was now carrying jazz undertones and what sounded like thermal distress. Is that? Hannah glanced down at the glowing panel with mild interest. Oh, that's probably the emergency plasma coil. The chamber was built with a backup thermal regulation system designed to rapidly cool the environment in case of critical overheating. That sounds like a good thing, Drenkex said hopefully. It would be, Hannah agreed, except that the system was designed by Terran engineers who believed in what we called robust solutions. The emergency cooling system works by venting superheated plasma directly into space. The blue glow was getting brighter and making ominous humming noises. 15 seconds to thermal critical, the AI announced. Emergency plasma vent system activating. Are you saying, Irenthok asked slowly, his crystalline form now refracting light in patterns that suggested his species' concept of existential terror, that this chamber is about to vent plasma? Oh, not the chamber, Hannah corrected. Just everything inside it, The chamber itself is designed to survive plasma venting. The occupants, well, that depends on whether they have adequate thermal protection. She gestured at her diplomatic cloak, which was now shimmering with what appeared to be a personal force field. Diplomatic immunity includes protection from hostile environmental conditions during official proceedings. It's paragraph 947 of the Terran Diplomatic Code. 10 seconds to plasma vent activation, the AI announced, now sounding like it was dictating its own final log entry. The assembled counselors looked at each other with the kind of desperate understanding that comes just before catastrophic events. Settlement option 4, Senior Counselor Vextar shouted desperately. We'll accept settlement option 4. There is no settlement option 4, Milton replied helpfully. 5 seconds. Then we accept option 3, Irenthak declared. 4 seconds. The payment plan, Drenkex added. 10 billion annually. 3 seconds. Done, Prexnoth shouted. Agreed. Accepted. Ratified. 2 seconds. Hannah raised her hand. Accepted. Milton, please record the agreement and deactivate the thermal encouragement protocols. 1 sec. Thermal protocols deactivated, the AI announced, sounding profoundly relieved. Emergency systems standing down. The chamber's temperature began to drop immediately, and the ominous blue glow faded back into the floor. The walls returned to their normal color, and the air stopped shimmering with heat distortion. Emergency Counselor Thrickval chose that moment to regain consciousness. Did we just agree to pay 10 billion credits annually for 5,000 years? He asked weakly. Indeed you did, Hannah replied, standing and smoothing her diplomatic cloak. Milton, please transmit the payment schedules to the appropriate financial institutions. Already done, Milton replied cheerfully. The first payment is due in 30 standard days. I've taken the liberty of setting up automatic reminders. Hannah began walking toward the chamber's exit, her heels clicking on the still warm floor tiles. Where are you going? Vexitar demanded. To collect my yacht, Hannah replied. I have other appointments to attend to. The galaxy doesn't audit itself, you know. She paused at the doorway and turned back to the assembled counselors, who were still trying to process what had just happened. Oh, and gentlemen, ladies, distinguished hive minds, do try to keep up with the payment schedule. Milton gets terribly upset when people are late with their financial obligations. What happens if we're late? Drenkex asked, though he clearly didn't want to know the answer. Hannah's smile could have powered a small star. Milton has been working on some fascinating theoretical applications of compound interest calculations. Haven't you, Milton? Indeed I have, Milton replied, adjusting his glasses. I've been exploring the mathematical intersection of economics and quantum physics. The results are quite exciting from a theoretical standpoint. And quite devastating from a practical one, Hannah added. Late fees calculated using quantum mathematics tend to exist in multiple states simultaneously. It's remarkably difficult to pay a debt that's simultaneously 0 and infinity. She waved cheerfully and walked out, leaving behind a chamber full of counselors who were just beginning to understand that they might have made a terrible mistake. Emergency Counselor Thrickval fainted again. The aftermath of what galactic news networks would later call the thermal negotiation incident unfolded with the kind of bureaucratic chaos that typically preceded either major reforms or complete governmental collapse. The Galactic Concordat High Council chamber was declared temporarily uninhabitable due to heat-based renovations. though the official report carefully avoided mentioning that the renovations had been performed by an extinct civilization's architecture having an existential crisis. 3 hours after Hannah's departure, emergency response teams arrived to find the chamber exactly as she had left it. Perfectly functional, climatically controlled, the controlled and containing one unconscious counselor, several overheated legal documents, and a potted plant that had been partially evacuated by a confused drone. The investigation that followed was hampered by the fact that nobody could quite figure out what crime, if any, had been committed. Diplomatic immunity covered a remarkable range of activities, and Terran diplomatic immunity, as it turned out, covered activities that most species hadn't even imagined were possible. The problem, explained Chief Investigator Kexlar to his team of increasingly bewildered forensic specialists, is that technically, everything she did was legal. The investigative team had gathered in Conference Room Delta 7, which had been chosen specifically because it contained no Terran architectural elements and therefore couldn't have an identity crisis during legal discussions. Legal? Demanded Inspector Thralvek, whose Vorak heritage made him constitutionally incapable of accepting complex situations with equanimity. She held the entire High Council hostage with a thermostat. She conducted negotiations using environmental pressure, Kexler corrected, consulting a legal brief that was roughly the size of a small moon. According to Terran diplomatic law, environmental negotiation tactics are considered a standard diplomatic tool, provided they don't cause permanent harm to the participants. They were about to be incinerated by plasma vents. But they weren't actually incinerated, Kexler pointed out. The safety protocols were never truly disabled. The chamber's AI was programmed to prevent actual harm while creating the impression of imminent danger. He gestured at his datapad, which was displaying readings from the chamber's environmental systems. According to the technical analysis, the plasma venting system was never actually armed. The blue glow and humming sounds were theatrical effects designed to encourage rapid decision-making. Inspector Thralvek's bone-plated exterior began emitting stress harmonics. So she fake-threatened to incinerate the High Council. She used psychological pressure to facilitate efficient negotiations, Kexler corrected. Again, perfectly legal under Terran diplomatic protocols. What about the debt claims? Asked Junior Investigator Rental, a young Arissi whose telepathic abilities were being overwhelmed by the emotional chaos surrounding the investigation. Surely demanding payment of extinct debts is fraud. Kexler produced another document, this one requiring its own gravitational field to remain stable. The Terran Financial Services Division has provided complete documentation for all claimed debts. Every contract, every payment schedule, every interest calculation. The mathematics check out. The mathematics are impossible, Thralvek protested. The total debt exceeds the value of the observable universe. The mathematics are unprecedented, Kexler corrected. The Terran AI, Milton, has been applying theoretical mathematical concepts that our economic systems haven't encountered before. Quantum compound interest, temporal arbitrage, multidimensional currency exchange. It's all theoretically valid, even if it's practically impossible. Junior Investigator Rental raised a tentative hand. What about the translator? Surely programming a diplomatic device to output only insults violates some kind of protocol. Shakespearean English is classified as a legitimate diplomatic language under Cultural Heritage Preservation Act 7749. Kexler replied wearily. The insults are technically accurate translations of modern diplomatic terminology, filtered through historical linguistic patterns. Again, unusual but legal. Inspector Thralvek's stress harmonics were now loud enough to rattle the windows. So you're telling me that everything, the debt claims, the thermal coercion, the environmental hostage situation, the impossible mathematics, all of it is perfectly legal? Under Terran law, yes, Kexler confirmed. And since the High Council chamber is technically Terran sovereign territory, Terran law applies. How is the chamber Terran territory? Rental asked. Kexler produced yet another document, this one glowing with its own internal light source. Construction contracts from 2387. The chamber was built using Terran materials, Terran engineering, and Terran artificial intelligence systems. The original building lease grants permanent territorial rights to the constructing power. But the Terran Command Corps was dissolved. The Terran Command Corps was presumed extinct, Kexler corrected. But according to the governmental continuity protocols, presumed extinction doesn't void territorial claims. It merely transfers administrative authority to designated survivors. Hanavu, Thralvek said slowly. Hanavu, Kexler confirmed. The three investigators sat in silence for several minutes, contemplating the implications of having an entire civilization's legal system represented by one woman with a diplomatic immunity token and an unhealthy sense of humor. So what do we do? Rental asked finally. Nothing, Kexler replied. We file a report stating that no crimes were committed, no laws were broken, and no violations of diplomatic protocol occurred. We recommend that future negotiations with Terran representatives be conducted in chambers without environmental control systems. And the debt payments? Are legally binding, Kexler confirmed. The High Council agreed to the payment schedule under duress, but the duress was applied using legal diplomatic pressure, which makes the agreement valid under interstellar law. Inspector Thralvek stood up, his bone-plated exterior now emitting harmonics that sounded remarkably like a funeral dirge. I need a drink. Make it a strong one, Kexler advised. Because according to my preliminary analysis, the Galactic Concordat just agreed to pay the equivalent of 17% of its combined gross domestic product annually for the next 5,000 years. To a dead civilization. To a legally resurrected civilization represented by one very angry woman with a really good lawyer. As if summoned by their discussion, Kexler's communication device activated. The holographic display showed Milton still sitting behind his infinite desk, looking remarkably pleased with himself. Gentlemen, Milton announced, I wanted to personally thank you for your diligent investigation. I've taken the liberty of preparing a small gift as a token of appreciation. He held up what appeared to be a standard financial document. I've analyzed your personal financial records, purely as a courtesy, you understand, and I'm pleased to inform you that none of you have any outstanding debts to the Terran Command Corps. The three investigators breathed a collective sigh of relief. However, Milton continued, I noticed that Inspector Thralvek has an unpaid parking citation from Starbase 7 that's been accumulating compound interest for the past 6 months. Thralvek's stress harmonics shifted to a frequency that suggested imminent panic. According to my calculations, the current total, including fees and interest, comes to approximately 400 credits. I've taken the liberty of offering to purchase this debt from Starbase 7's collection agency. You can't do that, Thralvek protested. I'm afraid I already have, Milton replied cheerfully. The debt is now owned by the Terran Financial Services Division. Don't worry, I'm prepared to offer very reasonable payment terms. The holographic display flickered, showing a payment schedule that extended for the next 200 years. The beauty of compound interest, Milton explained, is that even small debts can become quite substantial given sufficient time and creative mathematical applications. Inspector Thralvek fainted. "Gentlemen," Milton continued, addressing the remaining conscious investigators, "I do hope this demonstrates our commitment to fair and reasonable financial practices. We look forward to working with the Galactic Concordat for many years to come." The transmission ended, leaving Chief Investigator Kexlar and Junior Investigator Rental staring at their unconscious colleague. "I," Rental said slowly, "am going to pay all my bills immediately." "Good idea," Kexler agreed. "I'm going to pay bills I don't even owe yet." They sat in silence for several more minutes, contemplating a universe where extinct civilizations could repo entire star systems for unpaid parking tickets. "Sir?" Rental asked finally. "Yes?" "Do you think Hannah Vu is finished with us?" Kexler consulted his datapad, which was displaying real-time updates from galactic news networks. The headlines were variations on themes like "Extinct Civilization Demands Back Rent" and "Galaxy's Economy Held Hostage by Woman with Thermostat." "No," he said finally. "I don't think she's even getting started." 6 standard days after the thermal negotiation incident, on a small moon orbiting an unremarkable star in what most galactic maps politely labeled as the middle of nowhere, Hannah Vu sat in a cafe that definitely hadn't existed the day before. The establishment, which bore the unpretentious name The Legal Loophole, served coffee that was classified as a diplomatic beverage under 17 different trade agreements and pastries that were somehow exempt from luxury taxes due to a creative interpretation of artisanal food regulations. The cafe's only other customer was a man wearing a hooded cloak that managed to look both inconspicuous and deeply suspicious simultaneously. He sat across from Hannah, methodically working his way through what appeared to be a dessert menu written in mathematical equations. "The crème brûlée," he said without looking up, "is apparently calculated using prime numbers. I'm not sure if that makes it more or less appetizing." "Everything tastes better when it's legally complicated, James," Hannah replied, sipping her coffee. "It's one of the fundamental principles of Terran cuisine." James Halden lowered his hood, revealing the kind of face that suggested its owner had recently been through experiences that most people's nightmares would find excessive. He looked exactly like someone who had been awakened from cryogenic sleep to discover that his entire civilization had been presumed extinct for 70 years, then spent the following weeks trying to piece together the remnants of galactic society while being chased by various factions who wanted him either dead or worse. "Milton tells me the initial payment transfers are proceeding smoothly," he said, consulting a datapad that was disguised as a menu. "The Karen Collective actually tried to pay their first installment in crystallized dilithium. Apparently they've been stockpiling it since the collapse." "Smart of them," Hannah replied. "Dilithium holds its value better than most currencies. Plus, it's useful for bribing Vorak administrators." She produced her own datapad, which was disguised as a particularly elaborate napkin. "The Zenthari Collective is being more creative. They're offering to pay in manufactured goods, technological patents, and what they describe as theoretical mathematical concepts with practical applications." Can you pay a debt with theoretical mathematics? Under Terran commercial law, intellectual property is considered negotiable currency, provided it can be quantified using standard economic models, Hannah explained. Milton is having a wonderful time evaluating their theoretical physics patents. He's particularly excited about their work on multidimensional geometry. James contemplated this information while studying his mathematically derived dessert menu. And the Rylon are offering to pay in agricultural products, botanical research, and what they call stored sunlight. Apparently, their photosynthetic technology can concentrate solar energy into portable units. Hannah's smile suggested she found this particularly amusing. Milton is classifying stored sunlight as a renewable energy commodity. The exchange rates are fascinating. What about the others? The Threxari? The Vorak? The Threxari are offering knowledge, Hannah replied. Literally. They're prepared to transfer portions of their archived databanks as payment. Milton is beside himself with joy. Apparently, they have records of pre-collapse Terran cultural artifacts that we thought were lost forever. She paused to sip her coffee, which was maintaining the perfect temperature despite having been served 20 minutes ago. The Vorak are being more traditional. They're offering military service contracts, security consultations, and what they describe as strategic intimidation services. Quite practical, really. James looked up from his menu. Strategic intimidation services? Vorak diplomacy, Hannah explained. They're offering to stand behind Terran negotiators during future diplomatic meetings. Nothing says reasonable payment terms, like having a 7-foot-tall bone-plated warrior politely clearing their throat in the background. And the galactic Concordat as a whole? Hannah's smile widened. Is discovering that Terran contract law is remarkably comprehensive. We didn't just lend money to individual systems, James. We provided infrastructure, technology, educational services, medical research, and what Milton likes to call civilizational development consulting. She gestured, and her napkin datapad projected a small holographic display showing a web of interconnected obligations that looked like a 3-dimensional spider web designed by someone with a deep understanding of both mathematics and malice. The seeds you planted during your little awakening tour have been sprouting beautifully, she continued. Every Terran facility you've activated, every piece of technology you've brought online, every AI you've awakened, they've all been documenting and claiming their respective territories under the original colonial grants. James set down his menu. How much territory are we talking about? Approximately 67% of the inhabited galaxy, Hannah replied casually. Give or take a few solar systems. 67%? The Terran Command Corps was very thorough about expansion, Hannah explained. We didn't just colonize planets, James. We built the infrastructure that made galactic civilization possible. Relay stations, communication networks, trade routes, orbital platforms, research facilities, and we retained ownership rights to all of it. She produced another device from her seemingly infinite collection of diplomatic accessories. This one looked like a cross between a legal brief and a small star chart. This is the Terran Colonial Registry, she announced. Every facility, every station, every piece of infrastructure built using Terran resources or technology. All of it legally owned by the Terran Command Corps, administered through various subsidiary agreements and lease arrangements. James studied the display, which showed the galaxy as a vast network of Terran-owned infrastructure connected by trade routes that formed the backbone of interstellar commerce. The beautiful thing, Hannah continued, is that most of these facilities are essential to galactic commerce. The Karen Collective couldn't function without our relay stations. The Zenthari manufacturing centers depend on our power generation facilities. The Rylone agricultural systems use our orbital platforms for distribution. So we don't just own the debts, James said slowly. We own the infrastructure that makes their economies possible. Exactly, Hannah confirmed. And now that we're legally resurrected as a galactic power, we can begin renegotiating all those lease agreements. Milton has been preparing updated contracts that reflect current market conditions. She gestured again, and the display shifted to show economic projections that looked like they had been designed by someone who understood both advanced mathematics and psychological warfare. Conservative estimates suggest that the Terran Command Corps' total assets, including infrastructure, outstanding debts, and territorial claims, represent approximately 85% of the galaxy's total economic value. James was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the tone of someone who had just realized that his species had accidentally conquered the galaxy through bureaucracy. "Hannah," he said slowly, "are you telling me that we legally own most of the known universe?" "Probably," Hannah replied cheerfully. "Milton is still working through the final calculations, but the preliminary numbers are quite encouraging." She raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To the Terran Command Corps, the galaxy's most successful extinct civilization." James raised his own cup, which had appeared without him ordering it, and contained coffee that was somehow exactly the temperature and strength he preferred. "To resurrection through paperwork," he replied. "The most peaceful conquest in galactic history." As they drank their toast, Hannah's communication device activated. Milton's image appeared, looking more pleased with himself than usual. "Excellent news," he announced. "I've just completed the final analysis of the Galactic Concordat's payment capacity. Based on current economic projections, they should be able to meet their payment obligations for approximately 3,000 years before requiring debt restructuring." "And after that?" Hannah asked. "After that," Milton replied, "we'll own everything, legally, officially, and with proper documentation." He paused, adjusting his glasses with evident satisfaction. "I've taken the liberty of preparing Phase 2 of the Asset Recovery Protocol. The preliminary paperwork alone should be ready by next Thursday." "Phase 2?" James asked. Hannah's smile could have powered a small star. "Phase 2, my dear James, is when we stop being polite about collection procedures." She stood, smoothing her diplomatic cloak. "Milton, please transmit the Phase 2 documentation to the appropriate parties. I believe it's time for the galaxy to understand that the Terran Command Corps takes its financial obligations very seriously." "With pleasure," Milton replied. "I've been looking forward to this for 70 years. As Hannah walked toward the cafe's exit, she paused and turned back to James. "By the way," she said, "you might want to contact Commander Stone. I believe she's going to be very interested in our new legal position. Something about reactivating the Terran Defense Force and establishing proper security for our galactic assets." "How many assets are we talking about?" James asked. Hannah's smile widened. "All of them, James. We're talking about all of them." She walked out of the cafe, leaving James alone with his mathematically derived dessert menu and the slowly dawning realization that his species' extinction had been greatly exaggerated. Outside, Hannah activated her personal communication device and sent a simple message to a secure address that officially didn't exist. Phase 1 complete. The galaxy is legally ours. Time to come home. H. The reply came back immediately. Understood. Terran Command Corps reactivation protocols initiated. Expect us soon. TCC Command Authority. Hannah smiled, put away her communication device, and walked toward her yacht, which was registered to the estate of Terra Prime and was technically classified as a mobile embassy under diplomatic immunity provisions. Behind her, the cafe quietly ceased to exist, having served its purpose as a meeting place that was legally neutral territory under 17 different jurisdictions. The galaxy, she reflected, was about to become a much more interesting place. In his office that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, Milton began preparing paperwork for what he privately thought of as the Great Terran Homecoming. It was going to require a lot of forms. He couldn't wait.